Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
And I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. We're back here again. What should we talk about today, Stuart?
Well, what's on my mind at the moment, Simon? Well, what's on my mind? I mentioned it briefly on a previous episode that a 3-bed masonette that I'd put an offer in and which was accepted over a year ago just disappeared off the radar when the vendor suggested that we would be responsible for extending the lease, which I of course challenged. So that then disappeared, but I this week got an email to now say that sufficiently the lease extension is complete and it's now ready for continuation of the conveyancing process. So that's what's on my mind now, what I'm going to do with that, because it's a year on and obviously requires funding. The other thing, which I'm not sure I've mentioned on the podcast previously, but according to one of my specialist tax advisors, we overpaid on stamp duty quite significantly, to the tune of somewhere in the region of sort of £25,000, so not an insignificant sum.
Definitely not.
No, 25 to 30k. And I have a good relationship with the solicitor, or had a good relationship with the solicitor, and then it's fine. This is all business. But the challenge was that we overpaid because the property we'd bought had a number of rooms, all with en suites, and actually the size of the property had 2 kitchens and 2 communal areas. Would have taken a lower SDLT. So I think, we
does that have to come through as a challenge to your solicitor then and their advice? Is it not something that you can just sort of put in a back claim for to correct?
You can, if it's within a certain time frame, which we've missed. So it's a really good point, actually. Within a certain time frame, you can actually look to reclaim via HMRC. We missed that point, and therefore we have to go to the solicitor. Unfortunately, it's not something obviously we want to do. However, all solicitors have, as you can imagine, a bleep ton of insurance for these sorts of situations. So it's not anything. But what I would say is that if you've got any plans of going through the legal ombudsman, don't expect anything to happen anytime soon. So just from submission of the issue, they say that you have to wait 6 months even for them just to respond, i.e. acknowledge, which,
wow, with
my personality of liking to know things, it took some going. In fact, and I did call after like 1 or 2 months, just said, have you got it, to get confirmation they had. But the irony on that one is, we got acknowledgement after 6 months, and then I think 7 or 8 months later, so the legal ombudsman then come back to me and say, right, we need all of these documents, of which there are 15, fucking number out the air, which we need back from you within 7 working days. Well, thanks for that. You take your time, you put your feet up, get a cigar in, but when you need something from me, it has to be done. But I'd imagine in their defence, they're very, very busy. So that's happening.
So I don't know much in the way of details on SDLT exceptions, but I know there are quite a lot of SDLT exceptions for particular cases. So, for example, when the house is uninhabitable and, or perhaps I should say, in cases where the previous owner has passed away. I think there's also some slightly odd scenarios around people employed in military and things like that, if they're the selling party. So what was the exception that you're hoping to apply to yours?
Well, it's around the number of rooms in the building. So as opposed to it just being one house. So the first thing is it's actually 2 properties. So it was a commercial and residential property. So it was formerly a shop on a corner with kind of 2 buildings on top, which has been converted into essentially a 6-bed and a 7-bed property. They just so happen to share the same freehold. So the first argument was actually, well, they're 2 separate buildings. Mm-hmm. So, should you be paying the same SDLT on the whole amount of that purchase? That's the first one. And then secondly, my advisor's advice was that, given the fact that all rooms have en suites, that there's 2 separate communal areas, and essentially that they're separate rooms, that when we look at the thresholds, the threshold sits under the standard SDLT. So actually, rather than paying, and I haven't looked at the specific numbers for several months now, but we paid around, I would suggest, £35,000 to £40,000 for the SDLT. My tax advisor has argued that we should have paid around £5,000. So again, really, really significant. So I guess for anyone listening, that's if you've got any property which doesn't seem standard, i.e. it's not just a 3-bed house or a 1-bed flat, then I'd strongly... So anytime now I look at a property that's either... because you get a lot, certainly in the properties I buy, a lot of them are 2 properties that have just been knocked through. Historically, I've looked at greater than 4 beds, so 5 and above, and typically they're not the standard sort of buildings that you'd get for a typical buy-to-let that you might buy, for example.
Yep, indeed, yeah.
So my advice is, so I looked at a 15-bed, about 6 months ago, and that 15-bed was actually 2 properties next to each other. And again, my tax advisor said, I think you could probably argue, the case that this, there's, because of the number of bathrooms and so on. And obviously, like everyone else, I'd much rather know that going into the purchase than do what I'm doing now and trying to reclaim post-purchase.
Yeah, quite. So make the whole process a lot easier and save you cash up front as well.
And save money. I mean, that's the big thing. I mean, the thing is, SDLT is probably, next to the deposit, the single most largest payment you're going to make in a property purchase.
Yeah, quite possibly, especially these days with the extra 3% surcharge and what have you.
Yeah, and I suppose, that's what I'm thinking about here with the extra 3%. For me, it's always deposit, then SDLT. They're the 2 biggest costs for my company. Yeah,
I think I agree. I mean, if you total up all the refurb costs, then obviously they'd be up there somewhere as well. But typically they're sort of split up into a decorator and a plumber and an electrician and a whatever else.
And I was thinking, so just of purchase costs alone, obviously SDLT, but then of course you've got the development cost in inverted commas. What are you going to do to it? Yeah, so and the reason that's on my mind is because I finally had the legal ombudsman come back to say that they've now had what they need, the solicitor, in regards to paperwork. So the next thing I'm waiting for now is a decision. So I genuinely wait with bated breath. So essentially the legal ombudsman will either come back and say, yes, we believe you have a case, and this is what we believe the case is, or no, thank you, goodbye.
And then you spent all that time collecting bits of paper for nothing.
Well, and I had to get legal advice, so probably a good one, just for anyone listening, is of course these things cost money, but of course, so when we're looking at somewhere between 27 to 35k, which is roughly what it is, including so that if it were to be agreed by a legal ombudsman, the costs that I've incurred will be for the advice will be paid for as well. But that's a long way off now, and I'm not expecting that. But so the first is I have to pay for some tax advice. You can get an initial view, but if anyone's going to do a job properly, my personal view, just my view, is that if you want someone to give you real advice, pay money, because then the accountability exists. And I'm not saying you can't get advice from your friend in the pub, but your friend in the pub's likely not going to be thinking about this properly from your perspective. Once you've paid money, again, there's then a commitment between you. So in this example, me and the tax advisor. So I'm now paying him for advice, and his advice should be correct. Once I've reviewed his advice, and if I agree that I'm going to go along with it, now if he came back to me and said, well, you might get a recompense of whatever, £7,000, then I think, well, by the time I've paid for the legal costs of 2, and then I've got 5k, and it's going to take me a year, I think I'll just move on. But it might cost me a few £100. However, in this case, obviously, given the numbers involved, I was willing to pursue it. So I then had to pay for a solicitor to review that case before it goes to the legal ombudsman. And obviously, I had to get an independent solicitor. So, that's a couple of grand. So that's money I've put up front.
Solicitors certainly aren't cheap, are they?
No. So, so there's a bit of investment. But as with all these things that we do, Simon, it's like, okay, well, for that sort of money, I'll risk it. It's come out of the business, and we'll see. We'll see where it comes out. And I shall be updating you and this podcast as soon as we get that information, unless I'm just weeping into my drink of choice at the time.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
And look forward to finding out the next part in that story.
Thank you. Yeah.
In due time, maybe another 6 months.
Yeah. So, any progression from you on the releasing of funds?
No. So far, I've been. I've mostly been recovering from having had a bit of a break over Christmas, so I've been trying to catch up with bits and pieces. And the other main thing I've spent quite a lot of time on is trying to improve our sound recording quality. So
good.
I now have a new microphone, and you're using a microphone that you had already, but we've got them hooked up to together so we can be recorded separately, and hopefully the result will be good, but we'll find out when we come to edit this one. And other than that, I say we, myself and my brother, who I own the property with, have talked about the one we're planning to sell imminently, and that's progressing gradually. It's currently tenanted, so it's obviously needs to be handled quite carefully while we're just in the exploratory stages at the moment to get agents in to value and give their opinions on things before we want to scare the tenant or anything. If nothing ends up happening for any reason, we obviously don't want to upset that tenant who's in their home and living perfectly happily. So that just needs to be taken gradually.
It's tricky.
But I'm not quite sure how that process is going to change when they discard Section 21. Apparently there'll be a new process for regaining property possession for sale. But
really?
But quite what it will be, I don't think anybody knows.
No, because I was always under the impression. And this is the thing about, and I'm sure we'll have a separate episode on this, but ultimately, you are the legal owner of the property, and yes. As they should, the tenant has rights, as you'd want. I'm a tenant myself, so I'd absolutely want that right for my wife and my family. But then equally, we kind of accept that it's owned by somebody else, and once the tenancy agreement comes to an end, and if it's not been renegotiated, then I know there's always a risk that if legal owner / landlord wants to sell, we have to accept that. This is equally, you don't want people getting thrown out onto the streets, and that's the middle ground. So, interesting subject.
If once we've confirmed that we think we are in a position to be able to try and sell the property, we'll obviously talk to the tenant that's in there at the moment, and let them know, and just have a conversation with them and see what they want to do, how they want to handle it, whether they want to move out sooner, as soon as we start marketing it or whatever, or whether they'd like to try and stay a bit longer and see how the attempted sale goes. So we're going to be as open and as flexible as we can be with the tenant there.
It's always tricky. I mean, I've experienced this very recently, actually. Well, I say recently now, but so I bought a property, refurbished the property, and put a tenant in because we didn't get to do what we wanted to do. And the tenant signed a 6-month contract. I've always been of the mindset to be as transparent in my dealings as is possible. Obviously, you can't, there are areas where you're always going to be slightly opaque just because it makes right business sense. But I've always tried to be transparent as possible. And when I started to consider selling, I spoke with the tenant at the time, and I said to the tenant, probably 3 months prior to the contract, I said, look, just so you know, I'm thinking that I will be selling the property at the end of your tenancy. Don't worry, because it was a tenant and their child in the property, a teenage child, and I appreciated and respected that they just wanted somewhere to live. But I just said, look, I just want you to be aware of that, because I don't want it to be a surprise to you, like 1 month prior. but I'm thinking about it, nothing's happening. Within a week, the tenant said, I'm leaving the property and this is the date. And it was at least a month and a half before the tenancy end date. So I went back to the tenant and said, look, it's great that you started looking, but we are still bound by the agreement that you signed, and the date is actually whatever the date was,
Yeah.
a month and a half, hence the date she said. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because I'd been transparent, and because I didn't want to hold on, she said, well, the tenant said, well, I've already found somewhere, we're moving out. And I said, look,
it's a difficult situation, isn't it?
I just said, look, okay, we'll make it to the end of the month. But essentially that meant I lost money. Now,
yeah, quite. Yeah.
I was happy because I felt that my integrity came out in check. However, if I were to go through that situation again, would I be as transparent as early? No. I might just say, if we were getting valuations, I'd say, look, this is for a future event, don't worry about it now. And then, because we call this podcast Business of Property, and we have to remember there are people involved, but we have to run it as a business, and that's the thing. So it's a tricky time when you're looking to dispose of a property unless it's going to be disposed as a tenanted.
Yeah, and while it's obviously always an option in this particular property, it doesn't really add up as a rental property. The yield or return on investment on the purchase price of the property just
it's a single let.
It's a single let, yeah.
How many beds?
3.
And not in an area where you could look at multi?
I'm not sure what the restrictions are in that particular area. It could potentially. It's a reasonable amount of its value comes from the type of property it is. I mean, it's a detached house with good sized garden and things like that. So it's not that big a property in terms of internal space. So it may not lend itself terribly well to being converted to multi-occupancy, but maybe.
Might be worth the back of a fag packet. You never know.
But it has other issues that I think. Any new purchaser, be it for investment or be it for personal use, would need to then spend some time sorting out. Or maybe not if they were living in it, I suppose, actually. But it's a very old property, so it's single skin, and there's obviously always issues that come with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we shall see. I think I think from our point of view, it doesn't really fit in our sort of portfolio plans. So yeah, maybe another investor might be willing to take it on and do something different with it. But
fresh pair of eyes, sometimes it's just what it takes, isn't it? Like, when we've owned a property for several years, for some reason, it's like everything else, we just literally tired and don't want to expend the time or effort, do we? And then someone else comes along and got the gusto, roll the sleeves up, and they'll get it done. But
yeah, very true. Yeah, just take a different view and have a bit more energy to put into it.
yeah, very good.
I think it's probably time for us to finish today.
I think that's a good little chat.
So I'm going to dash off and do the school run. And for anyone listening, show notes can be found at thebusinessofproperty.com.